and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry. And of course, this is
My
my
name is Chris
co-host.
Huddleston.
There he is.
Oh, I jumped in too fast. Sorry.
I put in a big juicy pause.
I stepped on your line.
Well, that's fine. So today we're both very excited to be talking to you about Back to the Future. Do you have a set of synopses for us, Mr. Huddleston?
Yeah, do we want to do both? Do we want to talk about it all at once, or do we want to talk about one at a time, or how did you want to do it?
Why don't you do the synopses one at a time, and then I think they're inevitably going to kind of bleed into each other.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. I clicked out of it, and now I do. Okay, Back to the Future Part 1 was directed by Robert Zemeckis, and the synopsis from Rotten Tomatoes is, in this 1980s sci-fi classic, small-town California teen Marty McFly is thrown back into the 50s when an experiment by the eccentric scientist friend Doc Brown goes awry. Traveling through time in a modified DeLorean, Marty encounters young versions of his parents and must make sure that they fall in love or he'll cease to exist. Even more dauntingly, Marty has to return to his own time and save the life of Doc Brown. And it stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover, Leah Thompson, and Tom Wilson. And all of those people also star in Back to the Future 2. And the plot for that one is, it's also directed by Robert Zemeckis. And the plot is, in this zany sequel, time-traveling duo Marty McFly and Dr. Emmett Brown return from saving Marty's future son from disaster, only to discover their own time transformed. In this nightmarish version of Hill Valley, Marty's father has been murdered and Biff Tannen, Marty's nemesis, has profited. After uncovering the secret to Biff's success, Marty and the Doc embark on a quest to repair the space-time continuum. So both of us, I imagine, have seen these movies more than once, I would say, several times.
Yes.
So
yes, although I haven't seen them in a while.
Yeah. So I would say, I guess maybe talk a little bit about, our experience with these movies originally, and then go into how we feel about them now. So what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I remember enjoying it enormously when I saw it as a kid. And I have to say I enjoyed it enormously watching it again recently. We have done other time travel movies recently. It's become the thing. Like, we just watched Totally Killer, which made a huge point of referencing Back to the Future, right? So, and then The Flash references, not by name, but basically references this kind of model of time travel when there's a timeline and something changes and it creates sort of a, what was the term they use? As like splinter timeline or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that.
And that the original timeline is still continuing and that you can kind of get back to it. Like there are train tracks that you can get off track and it creates a new set of tracks. And the goal is to kind of get back on the original set of tracks, which a lot of time travel movies that take themselves seriously go to great pains to sort of scoff at and say, well, that's not how time works. And it's more complicated than that. And you can't really deny, though, that it makes for a fun premise for this movie, right? And they have a great deal of fun with it. And I remember, like, the last time we mentioned that we were going to do these, I said, Steven Spielberg. This is directed by Robert Zemeckis. These movies are directed. These are Zemeckis films. But Steven Spielberg was, very involved with it. He produced it. Amblin Entertainment produced it. And right off the top, it says Steven Spielberg presents, a Robert Zemeckis film. So I think that that's why his name leaps to my mind. Is I feel Spielberg's signature in it a lot. I feel his influence in these films a lot. Yeah, I've been rolling. What about you? What's your experience of these?
Well, one thing that I want to say, based on what you said there, I wonder if, now the term multiverse gets thrown around, which I can't really recall people using that term in the 80s. I imagine probably people that read a lot of science fiction, these ideas um, were out there, but I wonder if Back to the Future really created the idea for mass audiences of a splintering of time and a multiverse and all that kind of thing. I wonder if I don't know if there would have been anything else before that. I mean, we talked about I think we talked about in the Totally Killer episode, that this wasn't the first ever time travel movie. I mean, you had H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. But I wonder if really that kind of splintering off, and we get that more so really in the second movie, right? Uh, than we do in the
Right.
first.
Well,
But
in the
yeah,
first movie, it's pretty clean because they go back in time. Do you remember why they go back specifically to that? That's the date Doc Brown invented the concept of time travel, and that's why they go back to that date, correct?
yeah, I think
And
so.
things
Yeah,
go wrong sort of immediately, but that's
right.
why they punched in that date in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So actually, I mean, on that note, it's kind of inadvertent because first of all, folks, we spoil these movies. If you haven't seen the Back to the Future films, we're gonna talk about them. It was 1985 or whenever
I
it
think
was.
even people, these movies are so much part of the culture at this point. I mean, especially like when you get into the second one with the hoverboard and the shoes, which they've actually made those things that
Yep.
I wonder if even younger people that haven't seen these movies, they still have an idea about them. I imagine. I don't know. But as far as something that I was thinking about is this is one of the few movies when I was a kid that we went to see as a family. My dad took me to lots of movies, and then once my sister is a few years younger than me, and then he took uh, my sister and me to a lot of movies, but my mom didn't go to a lot. So this is one of those ones that really stands out. Like this and E.T. and Ghostbusters and a couple others. We saw as a family. So I always, like that always there's that connection with this movie. But and it was saw it in the movie theater and then rented it, and then this has been this these movies and the Star Wars movies and the Indiana Jones movies, you could probably find them somewhere playing on TV right now. If you went, because they've just been on a continuous loop almost since 1985. But I think the thing with both of these movies that really stands out, and you get it in the first one and you get it in the second one, is the great comedic performances that you have in these movies. Uh, Michael J. Fox, this movie made, the first movie made him a superstar. But you have all these supporting actors, Leah Thompson and Tom Wilson as Biff, especially when you get into the second movie when he's older Biff and plays these, and he's playing his young version of himself and this old version. Uh, it's I'm sure he did fine, but it's a little bit sad that I think that he didn't go on to superstardom as well, kind of the way that Michael J. Fox did, because I can't really recall a lot of other things that I saw him in. Um, but the first one, I don't know too much to say other than just it's about a perfect film.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just so tightly scripted, um, and
And it trips right
directed. Like I say,
along. Yep. And the dialogue is handled effortlessly. And I think it really stands up. I mean, you think, oh, great, it's 2023. We're going to watch another movie from 1985. And yes, we were kids then. So it's familiar to us. But I don't think it's so steeped in the time that it alienates a modern audience. I mean, the
no,
hair's a little different, wardrobe's a little different. It's Huey Lewis in the News, but that's pop music. I mean, it sounds like 1985, but not. You know what I'm saying. And then so
Sure.
then they go back to 1955, and it establishes this relationship between those two, brackets on that 30-year period. The town then, the town quote unquote now, right? I think it's the same actors playing the younger versions of themselves, and I mean they just make it all so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that the first film is pretty much a perfect film, and then
Mm-hmm.
the second one I think is a successful and an entertaining sequel that picks up the cliffhanger from the end of the first one, sows the seeds of what they're going to pick back up with in the third one. And then they kind of like Empire Strikes Back, then they get into the weeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the second one, I think the second one decided it needed to be more slapsticky to offset the inherent darkness of the storyline of the second one.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Because
storyline is definitely darker.
Biff Tannen is a threatening clown in the first one. And the scene, but the only time it really feels scary is when he's in the car with, is the character's name Lorraine? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's basically going to rape her.
Mm-hmm.
And then this scene of George McFly opens the car door expecting it to be Marty who's staging this. And instead he finds Biff, who outweighs him by like, but that moment where you realize, and I think it's actually Lorraine's line where she says, "Help me," and there's genuine panic in her voice. That's the only time it feels like a truly adult movie.
Mm-hmm.
Where you go, man, this has got that's a sharp tooth, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Otherwise, it's mostly fun. Even when Doc Brown is shot, I remember as a kid that shocked me, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't. I mean, part of it's knowing what happens, and part of it is just that it's shot in a relatively tame way. And the Libyans are a joke. I mean, now looking at
Mm-hmm.
Libyan terrorists, you're just kind of like, this is almost offensively
Yeah.
cartoon. Like terrorists are
Yeah.
real and they're scary, And these guys aren't particularly scary, but I mean, I get it's a choice. But then in the second film, when Biff has had the chance to, you know, ascend into power in this town, it's really ugly and it's
Mm-hmm.
really dark. And he is not just, stupid, he's cruel. And
Yeah.
you see evidence of that everywhere in the versions of Lorraine and the other people that we don't get to see George McFly. They didn't bring Crispin Glover back. Um, the versions that you get to see of those characters aren't as fun. I mean,
No.
it's upsetting, and so the focus shifts from like, oh, this is crazy, we gotta get back to the future, to we have to fix the future,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to unmess up. And it's similar to what happens in The Flash. I have to go back and I have to undo the thing I did originally to sort of get things back to normal. And it's very anxiety provoking. And I think they probably made the choice to do all of the comic bits like in a really like slapsticky way
Yeah.
to try and offset some of that darkness.
But you said Empire Strikes Back, and I actually thought about Empire Strikes Back a bit, watching this, where it definitely is, with the Empire Strikes Back, you get that darker story than the original Star Wars, and they do that a little bit in this, where it's a little bit, it's a little bit darker and but in more of a kid friendly kind of way. But and also, as I was saying, with those performances, you get the great performances with Lorraine and with the older Biff, uh,
Right.
which was uh, meant to be, he was based on Donald Trump. which is funny now because
Yeah.
I'm sure they never would have imagined, him being president. But
Well, and the year
the
was 2015, right?
yeah,
So the future they go to is 30 years. The past they go to is 30 years prior to 1985,
yeah,
and the future they come forward to is 2015. So I mean,
and that's
there was a Trump ascendancy, but on a very different scale and of a very different tenor.
yeah, and it's fun to see the little, we don't have flying cars. They do the little joke with Jaws 19, and it's like a 3D hologram thing of Jaws comes out. We don't have hoverboards, um, but now do you know the that there was a little bit of troubled production with the first one, that Michael J. Fox was not the original actor in the role?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that they recast it, but I don't know what the trouble was.
So Eric Stoltz was the original Marty, and they filmed. I mean, there you can find there are clips on you can find them on YouTube of Eric Stoltz in the role, and they filmed. I mean, I think they shot for a few weeks, and then just decided this isn't working, and they needed to recast, which is pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. And having seen it with Michael J. Fox, it's difficult to imagine anyone else doing that role.
Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
he just nails it. And it seems from the very beginning. And now, of course, this wasn't, we say it was the one that made him a superstar. It was hard. He was working, he was on Family Ties. Like,
Family Ties, and he did.
you knew, you went to that movie in 85, you knew who this guy was. I watched
Yeah,
Family Ties. I'm like, oh, it's him.
and Teen
You know,
Teen Wolf was before this.
Teen Wolf
But
was
wasn't.
before this.
Mhm.
But it wasn't. It was not as big a smash hit. We should do Teen Wolf.
That would be fun. I haven't seen that
With
in a
me,
long, long
a
time.
keg of beer.
One thing that I looked up with this, because I was curious, what do you think for the first one? What do you think the budget was?
Boy. I'm gonna say it was maybe $10 million. 15.
You're real close. It was 19, which in
19.
today's dollars is like 54 million, which I mean, today that's not a big budget.
Nope.
Um, and I mean, I guess if you think about it, there weren't like a ton of special effects with this, and one of the things that I really noticed watching this time is you can tell how much everything is just on backlots and sets. There's even
Yes.
scenes where they're outside, like where they're outside of Hill Valley on on the like 2-lane road. And it's like, oh, that's a set. That's not a real road, you know.
Yep.
But I mean, it's not like it's a big, glaring issue or anything like that. But
No, it
and that,
works.
yeah, it
That
works.
whole downtown with the thing is a set, obviously.
Yeah, right. I think they use that for Gremlins also. The same lot. But and then the second one and the third one each had a $40 million budget, and they decreased a bit in what they brought in. The first one was like 380 some million worldwide. The second one was like 325, and the third one was like 245. So there's a big,
Wow.
but the second one, that was still pretty close for a second film. So there's more special effects in the second, probably the third as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there are. And I think that the movies aren't the better for them per se. They've got an actual hoverboard in the second one, and they've got the flying train in the third one. You didn't watch. I watched all three. You didn't watch the third one.
Oh,
I think that the third one does feel. I think doing 1 and 2 feels right, because although it was conceived as a trilogy, what it felt like to me was the third one simultaneously tried to lighten the burden. It became less about fixing the future and just going to save his friend or help his friend, Doc. And along the way, learn something important about his roots and about himself. And it's sort of like, okay. And it's the most slapsticky of the three. And I think you get a lot of the three-peat jokes, right? Like in the second one, because Now we've been to the past and we've been to the present, and now in the future we get this fun overlap of all three timelines, and it actually feels to me like you almost didn't need to go back into the Old West. Like if you'd have somehow been able to just stretch that second movie a little bit, or make two movies out of the second movie,
Mhm.
you could have had the Wild West thing could have been the second half of the second movie. It didn't,
Yeah.
um but the idea that, so what in the second movie we revisit all of the key points, and he shows back up the night that Doc Brown in 1955 succeeds in sending Marty back to the future. So you get the thing, the burning trails and the spinning license plate, and Doc Brown goes, "Yes, yes,"
Yeah.
and then Marty comes running around the corner,
Yeah.
Doc, and he's like, "Oh no, I sent you back to the future.
Yeah.
You did, it worked, but I'm back." And so I think that those aspects of the second movie, despite the sort of the dark parts of it, make it a good companion in this podcast to talk about the first and the second piece. You can almost summarize the third piece by saying, then they go back to the Old West and they spend the whole time in the Old West, but they figure it out and everybody's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing more really ties it back. He plays his own great grand. Some of the same actors are in it again, and they're doing like really mediocre Irish accents, and
Mhm.
and it's just
Yeah.
not as fun because it doesn't chime with all of the stuff we've already established. It doesn't take what we've already got and take a three-tiered wedding cake and make an impossibly even better fourth tier on it. They're like, okay, and we're gonna do a Western. Kind
Yeah.
of, all right.
Yeah, it's always been definitely the weakest, of the
Yeah, but
three
it's still an
for me.
entertaining movie.
It's an entertaining movie, yeah.
But of the three, it's clearly the least interesting. And I think of the first two, the second one, the first one's almost perfect.
Yeah.
And the second one, it's really hard to live up to that. It's hard to now do it again, but better. And
But still
tough.
very good, I think. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely I can remember I saw the second, and I mean I saw all three of them in the movie theater, but I can remember seeing the second one and being a little bit disappointed in it. And watching it this time, I was like, it's really good. It's
Mm-hmm.
again, it's not uh, the kind of perfection that the original is, but I really like, you touched on a little bit that the final part of I mean, I think all of it is good, but the final section of the movie where you go back and, you see several of these scenes from a different vantage point, and Marty is seeing them and seeing himself. And, they do the whole thing of where Doc keeps telling him, you can't, Marty, you can't, do not interact with yourself, because it'll, and and that's been done a million times since, but I don't know if we as audiences had ever seen that. I mean, can you recall anything before that where they used that concept? Again, I'm sure science fiction writers, it wasn't like they were just making all this up. I'm sure a lot of this came from science fiction, but I don't recall that kind of trope of, oh, you see yourself and you can't interact or it's gonna, mess up. I know there was a Twilight, I think it was a Twilight Zone or a Ray Bradbury theater in the 80s where it was Bradbury's story where there was a hunt, like a big game hunter goes back in time to kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I believe they warn him like you can't like go off this path or anything, or it will I don't know why killing the Tyrannosaurus Rex wouldn't mess everything up, but he steps on a butterfly or something, and then that like changes, it's literally like the butterfly effect where it changes everything in the future. So that may have, I mean, that was a story that Ray Bradbury had written, I'm sure, before Back to the Future. But
Yeah.
beyond that, just this idea of, oh, you can't interact with yourself, or it'll be cataclysmic. I don't think it ever really been done in, pop culture.
And that's really the domain of the second film, because the first film is all about him interacting with his parents and the younger Doc Brown, who, as part of the trope of the movie, gets over it pretty fast, and they just sort of fall right into their friendship again, which is great. I mean, I just want to, while I'm thinking of it, touch on Rick and Morty, which is directly inspired
Rick and Morty.
Doc and Marty, right?
Yeah.
But it's all about this buddy relationship. And the first movie, only at the end when he comes back a few minutes early to warn Doc, and he sees himself. He sees the last minute or so before Marty Prime, as we'll call him, hops in the DeLorean and goes back.
Yeah.
And that feels shocking at the end of the look. Oh, snap. That's him. That's himself,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a moment right at the end of the film. In the second film, there's all kinds of fun. I think at one point there's even 3 Martys, right? At one point he goes back to that point and he sees the original him. He sees the second him, and he's there, waiting for that to unfold before he jumps in. But lots of stuff where he goes back to relive the 1950s prom night events, and he's coming down the stairs and he's like hiding underneath the window, and him inside stops. Hey, daddy, or whatever he's saying on the inside. And he's just crouched down being like, don't open the door, And so they spend a fair amount of the second movie playing with, on top of him seeing future versions of himself, and then meeting some of the 1955 versions of those parents and stuff, of him being back, being the second him in 1955. So the second Marty in a time where there shouldn't be any Martys.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of fun in the second movie too.
Right.
So this idea, and we see that a lot in The Flash, which is, and these things you change affect the future, and it all starts to come unraveled. But what was different in The Flash was it changed the past as well as the future. In this movie, we could sort of reasonably count on everything was gonna, like Groundhog's Day, everything was gonna unfold in exactly the same way until you did something to change it. And basically, like, if you took the magazine, if you put the magazine back in the right place, problem solved.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think I wanted to watch these two with my daughter because I thought Nova would really super dig it. And I just couldn't ever
talk her
convince her. Yeah, well, I mean, we had to watch them, and I was like, look, I think you'd really like him, and she just was never in the mood. But I think they stand up. I really think they stand up.
Yeah, it's whenever we talk about these movies like this, you can never remove the nostalgia factor of it. But I think if these were a first time watch, I think you'd be like, wow, those were really good. I can't, I don't know. I mean, you don't know what somebody who hasn't seen these movies before would think. But at one point that we haven't, we kind of went around it, but didn't exactly talk about it, is also these movies work so well because Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd have such great chemistry. You just like seeing them together.
Yeah.
And that makes it work too. They were just both so perfectly cast in these parts. And as you said with Michael J. Fox, and it's the same thing with Christopher Lloyd, is you can't picture somebody else in that role.
No, it became iconic immediately. Immediately. I had a thought. I just wanted to, I guess I've already forgotten it. I guess I already forgot. Never mind. It'll come back to me.
You also have, when we talked about the Marty seeing the multiple versions of himself, you also have in the second movie where shoot, who's Lorraine? What's the actor's name? Shoot.
Don't ask me people's names. I will probably
That's one of the things.
Be able to recall it.
as I've gotten older that I'm Leah Thompson.
Leah Thompson.
Where she meets, there's not much interaction, but there's a whole part of her uh coming from 1985 into 2015 with them, and she's in her uh well, I guess it would be her house as an adult. But she's a teenager then, and she runs into the old version of it, and they both pass out as soon as they see each
One
other.
screams, "I'm young," the other screams, "I'm old." They both faint.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she didn't play that role in the first film. They recast that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was not a significant role in the first film.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't want to be cruel. I didn't think that the actor who portrayed it, first of all, she didn't have a lot to do.
Right.
Second of all, I thought she was kind of, I mean, saying she was a dud is too harsh, but she was kind of a non, every one of those other characters leapt off the screen, from the principal, who's the stern disciplinarian. Everybody sort of was this bold, bigger than life, archetypal bang. And she just sort of wasn't. And I don't know if that has to do with what that has to do with, but I think they were probably smart to recast that role too.
They must have seen that as well, the other thing, this was one of these just gigantic, especially the first one was one of these gigantic movies where you also had you talked about Huey Lewis, but you had the Huey Lewis songs that were, The Power of Love and then Out of Time, that were just these gigantic songs that, it was a little bit like Batman in 1989, where you had the Prince songs that were everywhere. And this is that same kind of, the same kind of thing. And you have movies still now that, that really get into pop culture in this way, but it didn't seem like there were as many at that time, as there are now, where you have like all the Marvel movies and all that kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, it really, when you think in 1985 you needed to make a movie, it needed to be released in theaters. This was clearly going to be a summer movie, right? This isn't a Christmas movie, although I watch it. I would watch it at Christmas. I think it's a feel-good thing.
The second one was released, so the first one was July 3rd release date, and the second one was released around Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and that makes sense
which I
to me.
hadn't remembered. But
that makes sense to me too. But it was, kids liked it, teens liked it, parents liked it. Everybody, who doesn't like this movie? Maybe it's not your cup of tea, and you're like, I'm not interested in seeing that. Fine, but it's not objectionable to anyone. Like, you could grandparents and parents and kids could all have gone to see this movie together, and they all would have enjoyed it, right? So that's a coup, first of all.
Right.
And it doesn't pander to anybody, right? There's something in there, and I'm really specifically talking about the first one here. There's something in there for everybody. It's character driven, right? So there's some high concept stuff. And I mean, as a time travel movie, he has a picture of himself, his brother, and his sister, and one by one they sort of fade out of the picture, which is absurd, of course. Like, individual pieces of the picture would just vanish. It doesn't make any sense. But as a kind of a thermometer for how well he's doing in terms of this window of him being able to fix something,
right?
It's a great device. I think that, I think one of the reasons it also stands up is they weren't probably thinking of longevity in this sense, but they struck the right balance of being real and relatable without being too preachy or political. One of the reasons why it stands up is they play on this sort of, the mother being like, well, I would never do any of that when I would never talk to my mother that way. And, you don't want people
to
real
wild as a teen.
And then as a girl, she was what you would call a fast girl. And it's not, it's not particularly offensive. She was just any healthy American teenager with a sex drive and like a strong-willed independence. It makes her endearing in the film. But even in 85, you get this kind of chuckle at like, oh, we all kind of whitewash our own past or something like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it doesn't even get into, of course, the kids of 2015 or Biff and his gang of 2015 are all sort of cyborgs. Like they have all these implants that are pretty corny.
Yeah.
Like it looks like he's wearing a colander on his head and stuff like that. But
Right.
so a lot of the stuff of the future doesn't resonate because it just didn't come to pass that way. But I think it was a fun way of looking at the future in 85, because the ones that really try and seriously nail it, you just accept the pieces of it they nail because they got it right. And you go, well, of course that. They don't get any credit for the stuff they get right, but the stuff they get wrong really takes you out of the movie. So to give everybody these kind of day glow plastic things and have Mr. Fusion and have 3D whatever and hoverboards, it's a fun vision of the future from 1985.
It's not really like they're trying to predict anything,
Right. I mean, nobody yet
intentionally.
has nailed, other than Star Trek, nobody has nailed iPads and iPhones and mobile supercomputers in everybody's pocket. That's not part of it. Nobody thought that. They thought view screens and maybe supercomputers and talking computers and interspace travel and time travel and fusion and things like that. Stuff that we still haven't quite cracked, a lot of it.
There's one part where Doc pulls out. I was like, oh man, is that because it looks like the size of an iPhone? And I thought, is that going to be an iPhone? And it's a camera, but it's pretty much the size of an iPhone, basically.
Yeah.
But it's just a digital camera,
Yeah.
But
which it's pretty right on the money. I mean, the fact that it's also a phone and there's an internet, like they didn't even talk about.
No.
How could they conceive of that?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. One little thing that I caught this time that I had not noticed before is Biff's henchmen. So in the 50s, and when they are in the when he has the casino and the hotel, one of them, I had never noticed this before, is Billy Zane.
Yes.
Which I don't know that I caught that at the time, but I thought that was interesting because I don't even know if he speaks in it or not. But
they have a couple of like, hoop, get him. They have a couple of like goon. They're sort of a goon squad that,
right?
Yeah, what stuff like that.
Considering what a great actor he would go on to be, I thought that was interesting that you did.
Yes,
that he doesn't really have much of a role in these. But another thing,
still fun to have in your resume though.
Sure. Oh yeah, right? Yeah. And I mean, he's had a good career, but I also got to thinking, this is almost a genre unto itself, this sci-fi comedy. I mean, I guess you had Back to the Future and maybe the Men in Black movies that would be but other than that, I can't really think of sci-fi comedy that has been like gigantic hits like this that really got into pop culture.
I think you and I have watched some stinkers that tried to fit into this, and the thing is if you try for this and you fail, but that's sort of true of any comedy. Like if you're trying to make a comedy that's not funny, it's unwatchable. You're just like, what is happening here? And so I mean, I think you layer sci-fi on top of that, you're just setting an even harder bar for yourself because it's got to be both funny and interesting. A sci-fi has to be true to its own universe, the universe it creates, and then you have to be true to the rules of that universe. And that's harder than it sounds, I think. I mean, I've never written a sci-fi script, but the good ones, like Blade Runner, create this reality that's very detailed and very specific, and then everything that happens in the film feels like it fits within that reality. And again, I've said it before, but that's why I think Denis Villeneuve's sequel, Blade Runner 2049, was such a triumph. It was both a new film, a great sequel, and it felt totally plausible as the world that was created by Ridley Scott in Blade Runner 30 years later.
Yeah. Without it feeling like it was fan fiction or something.
Right. No, and there was new stuff introduced to it, but it still felt like the same world. It didn't feel like, well, and that's what's funny about that is Blade Runner is supposedly 2019, right?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, this incredible dystopian future, and we watched that one. And I was just like, Jesus Christ! Like, because
Yeah.
I sit around feeling bad about all the negative stuff happening now, but I guess we dodged a bullet. I mean, it could be
Well,
Blade
and
Runner.
probably 30 years from now is not going to be a dystopian, in that, although I don't know, who knows with
Not in
climate
that
change
way. I
and
don't
that, but
know.
yeah,
I don't
who knows?
open AI.
But, and, also with what you said that, they made this movie that appeals to all these different age groups and demographics. And also when you throw comedy in there, which is so subjective, what's funny? I mean, what a triumph that is that, you have jokes that land with so many different types of audiences, so it's, I mean,
Yeah.
these are really, really, really well written scripts.
Yep. Because it gets to be sexy, right? It gets to be and feel dangerous. His 1955 mother, sort of falling in love with him, and wanting to, and took off his pants and calls him Calvin
Mhm.
Klein because that was written
Yeah.
on his underwear.
On his
So it
underwear, yeah.
feels racy, right?
Yeah.
In pleasurable ways, but it's something that the kids can laugh at. Ha ha ha! His underwear, right? And people on a date can laugh at because it's like, oh, what's your underwear say? And then something that the parents can laugh at too because I was like, oh yeah, it was a different time, but I guess we were all still young and
Yeah.
alive,
Yeah.
and and it gets to do it with this sort of innocence that
Right.
is tarnished a little bit in the second film, mostly by the Biff character, right? I mean, they don't play him as a buffoon anymore. They play him as truly
No.
dangerous.
Yeah.
And and in that future, his mother has had plastic surgery, has had breast augmentation.
Hmm.
That like egregious, like he has made the world in what he thinks is his own. It is very Trump-like, but there's a lot of Elvis to it too. He's got the big
Right.
sideburns,
Hmm.
and his everything's flashy and gaudy and Vegasy and surface deep and about the bottom line. He's a murderer. We
Hmm.
discover that he
He murdered George.
Marty's father. Yep, and that
Yeah.
he's fully intends to murder Marty too without batting
Yeah.
an eye. So it gets a little dark, but still, I mean, I think as a kid, I felt I wasn't really scared by it as much as it felt really upsetting and it felt really unsettling to me because the
Hmm.
first one was so much fun that I thought, yay, more fun. And then I was like, yikes,
Yeah.
like they're going to fix this, right? But you can't unsee the dystopian future once you've been there,
Right.
you know?
Hmm.
And then the third one, we don't need to talk about the third.
No. I wonder with this first one, movies are always, it's somewhat of a miracle if they turn out decently at all. But you have to kind of wonder if they thought as they were making this, we probably got something here that has a good chance of being a hit,
Yeah. I think so. I think
just
you
because it
watched
was
the
such
Daily.
a good script and all
Yeah.
the talent,
And you don't know until you cut the thing together. And in those times, until it hit theaters, I mean, you could focus group it, but until you put it out in the wild, you didn't really have any sense of whether people were going to come and see it or not. And you had to line that stuff up, and then the die was cast. So, I mean, God forbid there was some sort of a natural disaster or something that kept people from going out to the movies or being in the mood to go watch, then you've just got a flop on your hands, I mean, there was no streaming, there was no, I guess video was coming in, but not really yet. It wasn't a big financial driver in 85, right? Not like it was it. I need to get my timeline right on that. I mean, there were videotapes in 85, but I don't think
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was the
We were definitely renting
industry
movies then. Yeah.
that it was. So maybe I'm wrong about that. Let's scratch all that. Anyway, um, yeah, I don't, now that I'm thinking about everything I said might have just been wrong. I don't, I don't even know how to finish what I'm saying.
We're not historians. We
No, we're
just watch
not.
these movies and
We're not.
BS about them.
But I mean, so
yeah.
anyway, I mean, you would recommend this, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And both of them. I mean, I think, like I say, the first one is, is a classic, and the second one is pretty close to, I mean, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If I
think
can't imagine many people watching the first one and being like, I hate the second one.
right. I think too that that's part of the reason I like the second one a little bit less and the third one even less is with the first one, you don't you're excited about it and you're like that felt great and these dailies look great and I think we got a great movie and we grouped it and they love it. I think people are going to love this, but you don't know that while you're making it.
Right.
When you make a $19 million movie that grosses $350 million, you have a smash hit on your hands, right? So going into making the second movie, it's yours to mess
It's a
up.
different expectation. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think
They didn't mess it up.
They didn't. But I do think that
It's
there's
just more convoluted.
It's more convoluted. But I also think you go into it with a little bit less edge because you're like, this is a sure thing, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to mess it up. And everyone's just a little bit back on their heels and less on their toes because it's Back to the Future, baby. We're making the sequel everybody wants. And then by the third one, so the second one does well. And by the third one, I had the thought that maybe they shot 2 and 3 simultaneously, but I don't think
I
that
believe they did because at the end of 2, there's a preview for the next one.
Right.
There's a preview for 3 at the very end of 2. So yeah, I think they shot them back to back.
Well, here's a question I have for you. Do you know this? Because the first one very much sets up to be continued, right? So I mean, in my mind, it was always at least a 2-movie thing concept and probably a trilogy.
I think that was their plan, assuming that, it did well and they,
And there was a reality in which maybe the first one didn't make its money back and then part 2 and certainly not part 3 would ever get made. But the first one did so well that I'm sure that they just went ahead and greenlit the next 2 movies. And I wonder if they shot them back to back or, maybe 6 months apart, because the third one feels even more slack to me. Feels even more like, oh, we're getting the band back together for a reunion tour. It just feels really comfortable, and lazy is too strong a word, but it's like, we got this. Everybody loves this. Hey, folks, how's it going? Another movie for you. You're welcome.
Right.
And the first movie, I think part of what makes it really sparkle is that it's a little bit hungry and everybody's waiting. Everybody really feels like the stakes are real. Like, I've got to nail this scene, right? And they do.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And which is not to say that they don't nail the scenes in the second one. I just feel like there's so many different tones. I don't know about the darkness of the tone. I don't know about making Biff so genuinely dangerous in the second one. I don't think it breaks the movie, but it definitely makes it it's a tone shift in a meaningful way. The villain of the third one is not dangerous in the same way.
Right.
And there is a shootout. There is a showdown in the third one. So I mean, anyway,
they play on all the cowboy movie tropes,
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that Robert Zemeckis has said about these movies is that as long as he is alive, they will not be remade. So I don't know what his age is now. He's probably into his 60s, I imagine, if around 70, something like that. I don't know. But because, I don't know, would they, once he's gone, would they try to remake them or do a TV show or something like that? I don't know.
Of course. I mean, nobody. Why don't you come up with a great new idea? Why do you have to reboot?
Yeah.
How? Well, I mean, they remade Psycho. So why? I mean, Psycho's fantastic. How are you going to improve Psycho? Well, it didn't stop them from remaking it.
I read today
It's not better
Along
than the
those
original.
lines, I read today that uh, one of Robert Downey Jr.'s, I guess, kind of passion projects is he wants to do a remake of Vertigo. And I mean, maybe, but I kind of jokingly was thinking like,
As
oh,
Jimmy Stewart,
they,
he's the Jimmy Stewart character.
I presume, yeah. Uh, and I thought, oh, they'll make a CGI representation of Vertigo and battling, So I don't know. I mean, I'm not, I think the we've talked about remakes a lot, and it's just, they happen so often. I think the kind of when a remake really works to me is when you take something like like John Carpenter's The Thing,
Yeah.
where, that was a remake of a movie from the 50s, I think, or 60s. And they did something completely different with it. They just didn't remake the movie, or something like
But it was a great hook, right?
yeah.
It was a great hook, and some sort of an alien thing buried in the ice. The team up there, like, what are the frontiers we haven't done? Space, sure, but the polar. It's crazy alien. What if they found something in the ice? Great hook, right? So
And that was
there you
truly
go.
where
And that movie carved its own path. I mean,
and that
wow.
truly was where there was a technological breakthrough to do something completely different, because the original one was just a guy. Wasn't he supposed to be like a vegetable or something? Like he was part carrot or something? I don't know, but it was like just a guy with some makeup on. Whereas they
Yeah.
did, all those crazy. So when you could do something like that, and they did essentially a remake of The Thing, of John Carpenter's The Thing, 10 or so years ago, and they there wasn't any improvement to be
Well,
made. They
wasn't it a
basically
prequel? Didn't they?
it
It
was a
wasn't.
prequel,
It
yeah.
was a prequel that led up to
It
the point at which the
Yeah, it leads right
husky,
up to the
the
to
wolf
the
comes.
opening of the original one, but it's also kind of a remake too, because they do the same, the transformations and all that
And
kind of
it's
stuff.
digital, right? This one's digital instead of practical.
They shot practical effects, and then the studio was like, we want digital, and they went in and basically did digital over it, or they did some extra digital stuff or whatever. So, but when you can do something like or even, as beloved as the 1933 or whenever it was King Kong, and then Peter Jackson does his King Kong, it's a completely different thing in terms of just, the one was puppets with stop motion. So when it's something like that, whatever. But something like Vertigo or Psycho, there's not a lot of special effects to that. So
Yeah.
you're not, um to me, those kind of remakes are almost like the Broadway version of a play and the off-Broadway version of a play. It's just different actors, different people inhabiting those costumes, and it's like, what's the point?
And
Um,
you've got a problem to overcome because you presume. I really felt this with Psycho. You
I've never
presume.
seen the remake, but
Don't bother.
yeah.
I found it utterly forgettable. You presume the prestige of the first one is getting, everyone's going to want to see this. Everyone loves Psycho. Well, everyone
Mm,
loves Psycho. Why do they need to see another version of Psycho? It almost can't possibly be better. And
right.
it's almost shot for shot. I mean, they just
Yeah.
basically remade the movie. And I'm like, why?
Hmm. Yeah, just do your own original thing,
Well,
but
we see lots of cases where stuff is, totally killer. Inspired by Back to the Future.
right.
It's not and referenced in it, but by all means, love Back to the Future and go out and write your own time. You can even reference Back to the Future in it. And
Hmm.
we both agreed that you can go listen to that episode, but we both agreed that it's really fresh and original and fun.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't think it's as good as Back to the Future, but it wasn't
No.
trying to be Back to the Future. It was trying to be a contemporary thing that plays with a lot of the same tropes about going back and
At
meeting your
this
parents.
point, at this point, the number of movies, once you get to where you're our age and you've watched it, you've basically seen everything. I mean, something that you're going to see that you're just going to be like, wow, I've never seen anything like that
Yeah.
before is pretty rare.
Yeah.
But, but, do it's just the studios just want to latch on to a name, something that people recognize just to get, people in the door or to watch it on streaming or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't, at this point, it doesn't upset me. It's everything's going to get remade and
Yeah.
whatever, it doesn't ruin the original in any way. But so,
It wouldn't
but yeah,
surprise me if they if they remade it, but more likely to me would be that they would try and spin up a series, or they would make another movie that is like Marty's kids, right? So it's
hmm
Back to the Future 4 and it's the new generation and he's not in it, and they use some cut footage of him, or they digitally remaster some stuff, or maybe he's a very old man so his Parkinson's plays, right? Doesn't my is it is Michael J. Fox
Parkinson's,
suffering
yeah,
Parkinson's?
yeah,
Um, so I think that I can imagine them doing, and it being sort of painful, but they don't want to let a property lie if it was profitable in the past.
or young Doc Brown. That's the kind of thing they love to do. So we're going to see Doc Brown when he was in high school
Right.
in the 30s or whatever it would be.
Yeah, right.
I
Right.
don't know. That's the kind of thing they seem to love to do.
Yeah, I know.
We
And
have
he'd fight Nazis, and yeah.
yeah, or whatever, because we have Timothy Chalamet as young
Willy Wonka.
Willy
Yeah.
Wonka coming out soon. And it's like, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and I said, I've seen Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory not thousands of times, but countless times. And at no point as a child did I ever say, gee, I wish I could see the story of
The
how he
origin
became
story,
Willy
right?
Wonka.
Yeah.
It's like, I never thought about that.
In fact, in the film, he is this kind of personification. I mean, he's a magical figure, but for a poor kid, he's also this kind of robber baron. Like, he's just this rich eccentric. And I think that what Tim Burton did with it with Johnny Depp, and Johnny Depp was very much doing a sort of Michael Jackson take on the character. This sort of what would an eccentric, crackerjack was fabulously rich that builds his own paradise, be like? Well,
Yeah.
Johnny Depp decided he'd be like Michael Jackson. I thought that movie was singularly forgettable as well, except there was a
very unnecessary remake. It was bad.
Yeah.
But I think it made a lot of money. I don't know. So
Yeah, I mean, there was some
But
stuff
yeah.
that I did like Helena Bonham Carter's teeth. She had these prosthetic teeth that were like piano keys. And there's one shot where she's sort of wistfully looking at young Charlie, thinking, I love my son, and she's just, her mouth is a jar, and just it's like it's crazy.
I vaguely remember that one. I didn't like it.
Yes. Well,
I
CGI.
like Tim Burton and I like Johnny Depp.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean,
so would you recommend both of these movies?
Oh yes, I unreservedly, 2 thumbs up. I would watch it again. If Nova said, "Hey, do you still want to watch Back to the Future?" I'd be like, "Absolutely," because I think I would enjoy it just as much.
Oh yeah.
In fact, I was delighted as I went looking for it, like where I was going to rent it. I realized that I own it. Back a while ago, when Apple was, delivering digital content, Apple used to sell, you could buy high definition versions of something, or you could buy standard definition, and it was like a few dollars difference. And at one point, it was the high definition stuff, technology, screens and things were more expensive. So most people had sort of standard definition screens. You could play a high def content on that, but you were paying more for it. So you're kind of like, well, I don't need that, right? And then there was a frustrating period there where I owned a bunch of standard definition stuff, and I had bought a new computer that I watched stuff on that had a HD screen, and it wouldn't play the standard definition stuff.
Ah, okay.
And so, and people, so I'm like, I spent hundreds and hundreds of, maybe even thousands of dollars in this digital content that I can't play now unless I go get an old. And eventually, I think Apple was kind of like, listen, we're not gonna. This is not a winning hill to die on, right? I mean, so then they just sort of said, if you own a bunch of standard differences, we're just gonna bless it up, and you own the. So
HD.
at some point in that period, they were trying to move digital sales, and it was the Back to the Future collection for a limited time for, I don't know what it was, $30 or something like that. And I was like, yeah, well. And that came back to me now, but I went looking for it, and
You're
it
like,
was
I
like, oh
already
yeah,
have
you could
this.
just hit play. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I bought them. So that was a little delight.
I watched these on streaming, but I might have them on. I might have like DVD box set of this.
Right. I don't even have anything that'll play a DVD anymore. I don't have a Blu-ray player. I don't have anything.
I still have a PlayStation that I can play. Play
DVDs.
them on. But I was going to say something there. That
You okay?
I'm having a hard time shaking. I don't know what I was going to say there, but these movies are very good.
These movies are very good.
Very nice.
So yeah, and we're pretty much at time. Guys, if you've not seen Back to the Future, at the very least, and I think if you
this
watch the first one, it'd be interesting to see the second one. They're fantastic. I don't say it lightly, but like with Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think it's pretty much a perfect movie. It sort of spawned its own genre, and $19 million movie made $350 million. There's a pretty good indicator if you're into numbers. Do yourself a favor, go check it out. It's fun for the whole family.
Yes.
Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. That is our handle. We are on the socials. We're around. You can ping us. You can leave us a comment. You can like and subscribe. Doesn't really.
If you enjoy our show, give us a 5-star review.
Sure.
On whatever your pod catching thing is, that if it takes it, because that helps us.
Sure.
To get more listeners.
Digital things. Do the things. And for next time, what did we decide that we are going
We talked about a couple of different things. Did I say the thing about the Wes Anderson shorts? Did I bring that up? Oh, okay. So that was my initial idea that I had. I don't know if you've seen about this, but there are 4 new short films on Netflix that Wes Anderson made that are Roald Dahl stories.
Oh, I did see this. I did see this. Yeah. Okay.
And they've the reviews are really great on. So that's something you could think about. We also somehow we got to talking about before the show. We got to talking about Kenneth Branagh, and there's a movie from 1990 with Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson and Robin Williams called Dead Again. And then another one that I was reading about this week. I follow all these movie maker people on Twitter, and so they talk about movies on there a lot. And there was this discussion about To Live and Die in LA, which I think is from 85 or 86. Have you ever seen that one?
I don't think so.
Are you familiar with it at all? It's Willem Dafoe, and I forget what the other guy's name is. And the soundtrack is by Wang Chung, like the whole soundtrack. But they were saying like it's this great, great 80s cop movie. It's one that I've always wanted to see, but I've never seen.
Huh. It does ring a bell, but
it's supposed to be very, very good. But we'd have to check to see if it's streaming or not. But maybe we can mull over those different ones and see.
Yeah, let's mull it over. All of them are of interest to me. I think that Wes Anderson and Roald Dahl is a great fit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? That just makes so much sense, that guy's style. Both of the styles of both of those pieces, of both of those creators. So, I mean, I guess I'm leaning towards that, but a good old-fashioned 80s cop movie with a soundtrack by Wang Chung, that's pretty good, too.
We'll have to see if it's streaming, because I hope it's not one of these where it's like, oh, we'll watch that, and then it's like not available anywhere.
Right.
But
so
the Wes Anderson movies are made for Netflix, and I'm gonna watch them sometime anyway. So
yeah.
And they've gotten really, really great reviews. So
all of which is good and promising. So let's wrap it up here. Unless you have anything else you'd like to add,
No, I think that's it.
go see Back to the Future again for the umpteenth time, or maybe for the first time. It's really the bomb. And Chris and
Yes.
I will talk to you all next week.